Welcome to the program. Kathy Galvin joins me. She is an architect and a member of the Charlottesville City Council. Kathy, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you.
So I have so much, we talked before we went on the air here, I have so much I want to ask you about, and we've only got a half hour, so let's get right to it. Charlottesville's West Main Street. The historic corridor, the old three-notched road from the early 1700s. It's the historic corridor that unites downtown Charlottesville out to the University of Virginia. Yes. A beautiful historic street that doesn't look like it looked just a few years ago. The dramatic changes that we've seen on that street due to development has come under some sharp criticism. And you yourself have said, you know what, we need to learn some lessons here and change the way we do some things. What are the takeaways for what's happening in downtown Charlottesville with development, particularly in this corridor?
So West Main Street really was a great opportunity for us to learn about scale, massing, and historic context. So that was often put an opposite other important goals of a city, which is economic growth, development, so that you get good revenue streams so that you can pay for schools and police, fire. That kind of orientation was the latter orientation was what the city operated on for the last 15 years, since 2000. When the buildings started coming up out of the ground in the last 4 years, people began to realize, wow, this is really not complementing the historic district that corridor represents.
Right.
And that gave rise to a 2-year process that has given us now a rewrite of our zoning that right-sized the buildings to be more compatible with that beautiful remnant of storefronts that are actually a legacy of the old Vinegar Hill.
Right.
And then also it gave us the direction to go in terms of making it truly a safe, attractive, comfortable, multimodal corridor for bikes, for walkers, for cars, and for buses. Because as we talked about earlier, the two big pedestrian generators at either end, a successful downtown pedestrian mall, and then a World Heritage Site known as the University of Virginia. So it was the moment, it was the place to start really getting serious about our values and to really put the vision that we have in our comp plan on the ground.
Right.
And our zoning, which is the tool to implement the vision, was totally out of sync with that vision.
It was sort of, I don't want to speak for you, but if I hear you right, that kind of zoning, those zoning decisions that had been made in the past were sort of leaning towards the size of, let's build it, let's get it up, let's generate a stronger tax base, because we as a community have to pay for fire and rescue and services and schools, which of course is the big part of any municipality's budget. We got to pay those bills, and those bills, like any family, the city's bills go up every year.
Exactly.
So how do you pay for that? You build a tax base, but we've reached a point then that just in the last few years we've seen where leaning towards that size of building it and building up the tax base has caused a lot of people to sort of take a sharp breath and say, oh my gosh, this is not the Charlottesville I fell in love with.
Well, and I think we're understanding too that we're experiencing the city renaissance that's hitting the whole country. People want to live in cities. People enjoy the ambiance, the variety, the opportunities. And we've got to make sure that those opportunities stay very diverse and that we're inclusive. So the other balancing act, of course, is housing. We've got to make sure we're building enough housing units so that we're not becoming so expensive to live in that we turn into a San Francisco and we turn into a Manhattan. So there's not only a physical dimension here, there's an equity dimension, which is all about livability but also affordability.
And Charlottesville, for those who are watching and don't know, it is one of the most expensive places to live in the entire state of Virginia.
It's close to
and there's a number of
Virginia.
factors. Certainly UVA influences that, and students paying rental rates, but there's also a number of other factors that play into that. It is astronomically expensive to live here.
Well, it's a combination of what we've also learned in the past year is that we have a constrained housing supply. That means that we kind of have an artificially low supply of housing. So we've got to be careful on what we develop. If we continue to develop only like office space and workspace, without thinking about the living space, what do you think happens? We generate an even more serious commute problem than we already have.
Because people don't live here, they just work here.
Upwards of 70% of the people that work here don't live here. That includes the university, that's the city schools, that's also the city government. So you wind up understanding that traffic congestion isn't coming from residents, it's coming from people driving to work. The parking problem is coming from people trying to find places to park so they can go to work. So you got to get that balance right of the number of housing units you build. They got to be in, and we're realizing more and more that you can't just be thinking in terms about the revenue generation of the tax base. That was the sole issue back in 1999, because in the 1990s, West Main Street, for example, and other parts of the city were pretty close to being derelict. That was also the time when all the investment was going out into Albemarle County. All the retail, commercial investment. There's still a lot of residential development going on in the county, but businesses, industry, they want to be in Charlottesville now. So
it's a good problem to have.
It's a good problem to have, but it's
yeah.
still a problem, especially if the housing is all outside the city and people are driving in to go to work.
Right.
So the big policy question for us is, okay, we're going to build like oodles and oodles of parking garages everywhere to store all the employees' parking, or we're going to start building more workforce housing so that the people that work here can live here, walk and bike and take a bus to where they go to work.
Yeah, yeah. So let me ask you about one recent decision in particular, and that was on West Main Street regarding the historic Blue Moon Diner. I say historic. It opened in the 1970s, but it's historic to me. It's a diner that it was actually built onto the front of a historic home, turn of the 20th century home. And what has been approved is a massive high-rise that sort of wraps around this. Explain that to us. Explain that decision. It caught. I'm among those who saw that and was shocked that was approved. And of course, you like the fact that the historic home and the diner were saved, but at what cost? It becomes almost an eatery inside a high-rise.
Well, and that particular project came in just before we passed the new zoning.
Okay.
And
which helps understand.
There and then there was also the developer gave the BAR a choice. Either we build at the 4-story height, but we'll have to tear down those buildings because they had already bought the land, they already had their pro forma penciled out in a certain way, or we kind of build the 6 stories, which was allowed by right under the old zoning, and we keep the existing buildings there. So you see, they carved out their developable land. It had to go up somewhere. They had to get the unit somewhere. So I think the BAR made the call.
The Board of Architectural Review.
The Board of Architectural Review made the call that it was better to keep those existing buildings than to go all new, but at a lower scale. And that was the challenge.
And they would have been allowed to tear down those historic buildings in a historic district?
The challenge with the West Main Street is that it doesn't have a consistent period of time. There are buildings from all over different periods on West Main Street. Like I said, the most intact period is going to be that 1890, 1910 storefront that you see that includes like Maya all the way down to what used to be the French restaurant. But I guess it's like a tapas establishment now.
Down to the railroad station.
Down to the railroad station. So that area has that age and detailing and scale continuity intact. But across the street, there's like a lot of different variety. And I've been told by people who are in historic preservation, because there wasn't a period established for West Main Street when they had designated the historic district, that's why there's debate as to whether something is considered a contributing structure or not. And I think the Blue Moon Diner was on the books as being a contributing structure, so the BAR already knew that was a scale of building they wanted to retain.
Right.
And so I think you look across the street and you see the beautiful piazza, if you will, that was created with the last Gabe Silverman project.
Yeah.
That was a very sweet.
Would that Gabe was still alive.
Well,
and
it was well done.
Oh
And
my gosh, the work that he did was fantastic.
And that creates a real wonderful sense of place.
And what a great legacy. And
Yeah.
again, I'll say it, would that we had more people following after Gabe's model. He wasn't the type of developer who would go in and just tear something down and build something new.
Well, he had some good buildings there to work with. They were definitely of a historic period, colonial. They had great brickwork. You can see why the Blue Moon Diner might have been, at least the part that was added onto it, might have been debatable, because it didn't have the same integrity as certainly as the building on the corner of 4th and West Main. That's a stunningly beautiful, intact Georgian building that I think they've restored that very well.
Right. So if I hear you right, the zoning, there's new zoning that will hopefully alleviate this kind of thing from happening.
Well, the new zoning does not allow special use permits for height, and the prescribed height is 4 stories.
Gotcha.
And that's east of the Drury-Brown Bridge. West of the bridge, it's 6 stories, but still no special use permits. So that's going to be governing what happens on that parcel that I guess is next.
Right.
That butts up against West Haven. So it'll be. People say, it's too late. It's too late. It's never too late to revisit things and to take a look at what could be better. I think the problem has been that there's been this belief that somehow zoning is sacred and untouchable. And ironically, it's the zoning is what should be changing in order to accommodate the vision as our vision evolves. Because the zoning is the tool to get the built form.
That's the community's tool, which I keep saying, it's not the tool of City Hall, it's the community's voice.
Right, and
this is what we value.
And that voice is in that, it sounds dry and very, kind of policy wonkish, but it's the comprehensive plan. People should know the comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
They should really understand it.
The code is in the plan.
Well, that's the vision that then should be driving the code. And that's the vision that tells us we protect historic places.
Right.
That's the vision that tells us we want walkable streets.
Right. And that community voice that's saying, I don't want this historic corridor to be a cavernous gorge of high-rises, student high-rises that reach the sky.
Well, because that was the other thing that we did succeed in getting right, was the relationship of the buildings to the right-of-way, or the space between the buildings across the street. So the setbacks now are the same on both sides. In the old version, it was a 15-foot setback on the south side, and it was a 5-foot setback on the north side. And we made it 10-10 on each side to allow for more trees, to allow for more landscaping on both sides.
Yeah.
The legacy of the 15-foot easement, if you will, was that at some point a streetcar was possibly going down West Main Street.
Again, and did at one time years ago.
Did at one time, but
it went right down the middle.
Street cars today are exorbitantly expensive.
Yeah.
And it's a very bikeable, walkable distance for a lot of people. And the buses.
You certainly see a lot more people walking that corridor than you did when I moved here in the late 80s. It is staggering to see the changes that have taken place.
Well, a point of pride, I think, for the city is that when you look at the census, we have something like a 12% of our commuters walk to work, compared to like the national average is like 2%. So we're a pretty robust group of people here. That once we live here and we can get a job here, we really take advantage of the fact that we're only 10 square miles.
Right.
It's pretty cool.
Let me do this. Let's take a quick break. Got to get a break in here. Lots more to talk about when we get back. We're talking with Kathy Galvin. She's a member of the Charlottesville City Council. I'm Coy Barefoot. Stay with me. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're talking with Kathy Galvin, a member of Charlottesville City Council. Kathy, let me ask you about another recent decision that proved to be controversial. The City Council overturned a decision by the Board of Architectural Review. This is in regards, as you know, to a historic home in the Venable neighborhood near the University of Virginia that's now, like many of the historic homes there, the rooms are rented out to students. The owner of the property basically wanted to create an apartment complex that was attached to that home. The Board of Architectural Review decided that's not in the interests of historic preservation. You're not preserving the home, you're turning it into part of an apartment complex. What was your thinking in overturning, in being part of the vote to overturn the Board of Architectural Review and let that development take place?
Well, there are two documents, if you will. There's the zoning code, and then there's the design guidelines when it's in an historic district or if it's in a historic building. You have to look at both, and you also have to look at the reality in the ground. That was an area that was populated by a lot of students, and the buildings around this building were apartment buildings. This was a building that looked like a single-family detached home that had been converted, like so many in our community, into multiple units. So I forget exactly what the additional numbers of units were. Maybe it went from 4 to 8 units. It wasn't a huge apartment complex. It was an addition to a building.
We've certainly seen bigger, yeah.
And it was an addition that was done in a way, to my eye, was certainly not discernible from the public street, the primary street, which is where you saw the historic storefront. And it took advantage of the alley in the back, which was access. It didn't disrupt any of the front yard or the pedestrian pathways with putting in additional driveways. And so the addition was very respectful of the existing form. It used gables. It was below the ridgeline of the gable. It broke up the massing so that it really did look like historic buildings always did. They added on. The idea that people did not add on to their buildings in the past is erroneous. The fact that people did not evolve and adapt their buildings so that they could accommodate new needs for their families is not true. People always adapted buildings. So what I saw in this was a very sensitive adaptation to allow us to get more people living close to where they work. In terms of a student, where they work is where they go to school. It was much better that they weren't driving to their classes. It was much better that they were able to walk and bike. So that was my reasoning.
Although they still have cars, let's be fair.
They have cars, but
that
to me, one of the things I would love to bring up and as part of the Planning and Coordination Council is having serious discussions with UVA about first and second year students. They shouldn't have cars. They shouldn't have cars on site. I mean, I went to an urban university, Boston University as an undergraduate. The fact that students are allowed to have cars, and maybe multiple cars, is something that I think is worth debating. So right now, yeah, they had the remote parking, and that's something that is really going to be important moving forward, that we don't renege on our requirements that we solve the parking storage problem, but that we allow multiple ways of solving that, so that, guess what? We're not creating buildings that bulk up and get big because they're building structured parking within them. So that's the balancing act, to gotta keep it in historic form and scale, and yet accommodate modern needs.
Let me ask you about another controversy in Charlottesville that you have to deal with on Tuesday, July 5th. And as we're having this conversation, we are having this conversation in advance of that meeting. You're going to be asked to make a very important decision on July 5th, and I'm sure City Council chambers will be quite full. And this, of course, is in regards to development on Booker Street, historic street in Charlottesville, right off of Preston Avenue, older homes. What's your read on this, and what should we understand about this?
I'm concerned about the fact that there's a rezoning request without any document that gives us a clear vision of that area. that vision is what I call a small area plan. It's like the strategic investment area has one. West Main Street now has one. It's taking our comprehensive plan, which is a lot of beautiful language, but actually putting it to paper
zooming in
and
to
giving
a
us
specific area.
some geography to it, some real understanding of the implications.
And for those who don't know, what happened here is that you have some older single-family homes, some of which were torn down. A developer launched a project, since sold to another developer, to create a massive building on this site that is essentially 3 apartments, if I'm not, an apartment on each level.
My concern with this particular situation is that the applicant is asking to rezone a residential R1, I believe, to a B, a form of a business.
Right.
And I see no need for that, especially since you've got a thriving little business district right at that intersection of Rose Hill Drive and Preston. So you
see no need for him to ask for
I see no need for additional business use at that point in time when it is surrounded by residential. So that's going to be what I'm going to be probing.
Right.
That's what I'm going to
so
be asking.
So you're leaning towards denying the request.
I am leaning towards that.
As the Planning Commission has recommended.
Because it had no public process to justify expanding the business district
into the heart of a historic neighborhood. Yeah.
So,
and we should point out, and this is part of the conversation, into what is largely an African American neighborhood. And so there's echoes, and we've heard this in the conversation in this community, there's echoes of Vinegar Hill going on here. Oh, here's another poor neighborhood of people of color, and developers are coming in and tearing buildings down and putting in what they want instead of listening to the community.
And for example, as we move towards a revision of our zoning ordinance, which I've been clamoring for that for 3 years. The resolution's been in place for over 3 years. We've been told by staff that will get going again after the Streets That Work initiative is complete, and that should be done. We should be looking at that at the end of July.
Which they've been working on for a long time.
They've been working on that for a long time, but we also need to be reviewing and revising our zoning ordinance for the strategic investment area, which is a small area plan, just like we did with West Main Street. So there's 2 fronts about how we're trying to revisit our zoning as efficiently and as quickly as possible, because we don't want uncertainty. We don't want to be confusing the development community or the public.
Right.
Both sides benefit from having the predictability and knowing what to expect. But what I don't like is we don't have that vision plan. Like in Albemarle County, you can't rezone something without it being in comportment with their master plan, which is a physical document. It's not just language and a comp plan. Other communities I've worked in, I said, where is your vision plan? So that's where I'm moving towards, is that, this is a little piecemeal. I don't understand why this is happening quite like this.
As an architect and somebody who works professionally in design, you saw this early on when you joined council. You saw this is a problem.
Yeah, and since I've been on council, what have we got? We've made it, we've institutionalized the idea of doing small area planning. That is a lot of public engagement. We now have 2 on the books. We've really been sluggish about changing the zoning to match the vision. We got 1 done with West Main. We got to keep moving now in the SIA, the strategic investment area, but I just had a walkabout with people from Cherry Avenue and the Planning Commission Tuesday night. What I love about the Fifeville Neighborhood Association, they've embraced the concept and the tool of a small area plan. Planning Commission now has to decide, is it going to be, where do we put our resources? Is the next small area plan going to be Cherry Avenue in Fifeville, or is it going to be Woolen Mills, or someplace else in the city?
Yeah.
So we've got limited resources, but I think what you're hearing is that we're, in addition to doing these small area plans, which are areas that need immediate attention right away, there's the bigger picture of our overall zoning is not working for us. And granted, this is overwhelming for staff. Our Director of Neighborhood Development Services needs to give us, along with our city manager, needs to give us their strategy for accommodating the will of council.
Let me ask you this. I only got a couple of minutes left, but how do you respond to the people who send me notes all the time and say, you know, I'm so worried for Charlottesville. I love this community, but I feel powerless, and I feel like the developers are driving the bus, and they're just building up new hotels and high rises and student apartments and tearing historic buildings down. And, you know, what can we do?
Well, I think what the city needs to be working on is really holding opportunities, many of them, for engagement, to talk about the brass tacks of why do we need to redevelop? I mean, to not redevelop is not an option. If we are not repurposing our parking lots and our empty gas stations, if we're not repurposing them in a really good way, and I'm not talking just in terms of the kind of uses that are in there, but the form. The form has got to fit the street, and it's got to be sensitive to what's adjacent to it in the back, usually a historic neighborhood. When we look at that and we get that right, then it's a win-win situation. You're getting the revenue you need, the development community knows what to do, and the public knows what's happening. Right now, we are in a very confused state, and I admit that, because the zoning has been, over the last 15 years, able to be changed at will by requests of individual property owners. And that's come at the expense.
Which has been a great tool for developers.
But it's come at the expense of the community having any faith in the zoning ordinance.
Right, right.
And so we've implemented already that when there's ever a rezoning, that developer or that applicant has to meet with the community. But it's still not within a vision and a context. You know, what we talked about, for example, with the Cherry Avenue walk, people want a grocery store. But we had a heartfelt conversation about, well, you need a lot of rooftops to support the kind of grocery store that you may be thinking of. Can you get it kind of smaller? And we got to get more people living here. Can you live with that? And that kind of important discussion is what we need to have. People need amenities. They need to have parks, and they need grocery stores.
Well, the Market Street Market works wonderfully.
But exactly, but it
Right
wouldn't
off the
work.
mall.
It wouldn't work if there weren't a lot of people living right around there.
Yeah.
You know, and so but everyone knows Market Street has a good feel to it. You know, it's got the right scale.
It works.
It works.
Yeah.
So I think saying no to everything is not the answer, any more than saying yes to everything under the current regulations that we have is the answer. So we've made great progress, really great progress. The fact that neighborhoods are vying for being the next small area plan is actually a really good sign.
Right. They want that attention.
They want that attention, and they want it on paper, and they want it to be a tool to guide the future.
Kathy, thank you for being here.
Thank you. And next time I hope we talk some more.
We will
Okay.
indeed. Kathy Galvin, she's a member of the Charlottesville City Council. You've been watching the Coy Barefoot Program. The complete archive is available online at mediaandcitizenship.org. Have a terrific week, and y'all be good to each other.